Reported rape cases, of course, rose by over 70% between April and June. We can speak to policing expert Eldred de Klerk. Eldred, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. These numbers are quite shocking, isn't it? I know that the minister is saying we have to look at it in the context of the hard lockdown, but what do you reckon?
Well, thank you, Shannon. Thank you for focusing on this issue. It is something that we do have to put in the public domain, and it is in the public interest to have a frank and honest conversation about this. If the lockdown is to blame for this, then surely our police and the criminal justice cluster and all of society could have and should have anticipated what the impact of the lockdown would be and put in place measures to mitigate that. So that's one thing. However, as you heard from Amnesty International and other commentators, crimes, sexual violence against women and the girl child has been increasing, and unfortunately it's climbed to pandemic level. And this is a concern. So we have to acknowledge we have a problem with sexual violence. Is it an all of society problem? Yes, because alcohol, patriarchy, toxic masculinity, all of those things play into it, and the sheer position of women in society and the power and the imbalance of power between women and men, and the whole engendered space that is completely disproportionate and unjust, has to be addressed. So we do have a problem, and we need to admit that. Does the police and the criminal justice cluster need help? Of course they do.
What sort of help? Because you have experts talking about crime levels in South Africa for years now, and of course about the police's approach. But we're not winning this fight. And I want to first talk about the president's efforts to deal with GBV, right? Because we know that he's established a committee to actually deal with it. We got an update last year about what's been done to improve the situation. But now we're talking about more rape cases in the 3 months at the beginning of the year.
Indeed. And until we reach the point where issues of political will and issues of political intent actually translate into action, which is what political will is, because it's not about ill intent or anybody's moral position. It's actually, what do you actually do? And I think this is what we're all asking. However, we're asking the wrong question. It's not what others are doing, it's what can we do collectively. As I said earlier, the police and the criminal justice cluster need help. Let's just acknowledge that. Let's also acknowledge that this is an issue for all of us to address collectively. So what we need to do is transform once and for all public spaces, including police stations and others, into safe spaces for those who are considered vulnerable, the elderly, the girl child, women in particular. And we need to dissuade ourselves even from this notion that there's a notion like private violence, that what happens in people's homes is not for the police to get involved in. In fact, legislation compels the police to stick their nose into other people's business and to ensure that they exercise and take the responsibility for the duty of care and the duty to protect. So they must get involved. If they need help to do so, this is the space and time for us to then say, we need a joint effort. We need to bring on board those institutions and public and private partners who understand the nature of the problem and hold the hand of the police as they do so. Nobody should be claiming that they can do this alone or point the finger at someone else in an effort to deflect the blame. We are all equally responsible, and it's time that we hold hands to do so. Safe spaces for women used to be run by rape crisis and NICRO and other institutions have diminished. This has to be rebuilt. Sessions for women to go and be protected, to meet with other women for care and counseling, that has diminished. All of those efforts need both taxpayers' money and they need space. Those spaces can be in police stations. They can be in community halls. They can be in schools. So just as a measure, we need I'm going to throw the cliche around, multidisciplinary, interdepartmental effort that brings public and private partners together to tackle this problem that we all acknowledge is a problem. Nobody should be saying we need to go with this alone, especially not the police, who are the ones who've taken responsibility for the act, and they've taken responsibility to deal with gender-based violence, and they need our help in doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. I was talking to Mbali Shongwe, who's launched a project because she was raped and treated very badly by police when she went to report the case. She said one officer actually tried flirting with her during that period. She was turned away and her DNA tests didn't come back on time, so the case basically fell through. So when it comes to that aspect of the justice system, a DNA backlog, for instance, how does civil society actually get involved in something like that? Because that is ultimately something that has to be fixed within government.
Of course, but it's government. Government, if we look at government, we need to firstly distinguish between the public representatives who represent our common purpose and our interest and are ultimately accountable to us. They're the ones who claim to be acting in our interest, and they need to account when they fail to do so. So that's an exercise in public leadership. There we need coherent and consistent leadership across departments and across our public representatives. One leave, you can't have programs changing, and this is what we've seen. So government needs to ensure that it puts together coherent and consistent leadership on the issues. That's the first thing. The second thing is when it comes to technical expertise. I don't expect the police to have the whole bouquet of technical expertise, for example, maintaining the DNA of the register, a sexual predator register, or the fingerprint register, for example, or police being on top of making sure that all of us have registered addresses and all our biometrics are on file. This is a combination of public service departments like Home Affairs, the Post Office, for example, the police, that's a public service institution, health departments, anywhere where we have contact. There's more information about you and I in the hands of private companies than there is in the hands of government, which is why it's often more difficult for government to track down perpetrators and to then look to convict them on the basis of DNA or any other kind of biometric, which government should have on file. That technical expertise can see a stronger relationship between public and private institutions working collectively to share information, to have joint databases, to ensure that they have consistent, reliable, and credible records about you and I. And then finally, we also have a responsibility. If my address needs to change, I need to register somewhere, for example, with Home Affairs, and say my address have changed. There's about, 2 million people on the move in South Africa at any one time. We're going towards a local government election. Are we going to go through the whole thing of saying to people, please register your address? That's something that you and I should do anyway. I shouldn't wait 5 years to be able to give my biometrics. I give it to the bank. I give them all kinds of information. Government and the bank, therefore, should be working together. So like ShopRite and Checkers and any other institution where I seek to just register and freely give information, yet government is not the recipients of that. So it requires this public-private partnership to ensure that we can exercise our duty of care and protection and have a safety net for women and the girl child, the elderly, the disabled or alternatively abled, and anybody who's considered vulnerable and therefore at risk or threat of crime.